it sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Feeling.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable.
This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
We got a new refrigerator.
No.
This is like adulting to its highest form, right? So the past like 2 or 3 years, we had this Samsung refrigerator, which we just hated. It constantly had problems. The ice machine would break on us and freeze up in the freezer drawer and all this kind of stuff. So
you didn't get one of those ones with a touchscreen, did you?
No. I refused. I didn't want anything.
I was about to say, I'd make fun of you if you
did that.
No,
I don't. All the smart refrigerator, I'm like, leave me alone. I don't want any of this crap. You know what I mean? So I want my refrigerator to just work. I don't need it to be intelligent.
Make it cold on the inside like they did in the 80s.
Yes, exactly. And it is cool. It's a great refrigerator. Like it's cool because the full back panel behind the shelves is like a big LED screen, or not screen, but light. So it's like it's
cool.
backlit basically. So it's a lot.
That's
you can
sick.
see everything better. And two things about this situation that I think are like adult cool, right? One is the water dispenser has an autofill. So you can just...
Oh, so it'll fill right to the line?
You can just put the glass in and you can say
God.
autofill and it goes beep and stops at the appropriate spot, which for me is like, that's amazing. But anyhow, we should probably get going here. So hey, everybody.
I think we should.
Welcome to the Biographers. I'm Daniel Newman, and with me is Akiva Miola.
Hey there.
And we're about to get going on to Alexandre Dumas, part 3, right?
Yes,
part 3?
We are part 3. This is, I would say, and we haven't quite gotten all the way into the final stage, but this is probably my favorite episode that I've written so far. Sweet. We get to hear a lot more from, his mouth because he's, making it up the ranks. We get to see some interesting characters rise and fall from the French Revolution. It's going to be good.
Well, I'm excited. I have been enjoying this series immensely so far. It's fun to see you get through a swashbuckling person. You know what I mean? You've done pretty heady people in the past, so seeing you go through...
Write a bit of action.
Yeah, like an army guy, but in an interesting period, who's a swordsman, and it's very romantic in a very like Princess Bride kind of way. If that makes sense, you know?
Yeah, really, truly. What would Princess Bride be without Alexandre Dumas' original writings?
Honestly.
There's so many tropes from Princess Bride that are 100% from the Three Musketeers, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I just want to say one more time, the Black Count, the book that I'm referencing, is a godsend for this specific character.
Sweet.
I have gone throughout the far reaches of the internet, and even characters that are associated with Alexandre Dumas, there's no mention of him in their biographies either. I haven't really gotten to the bottom of it. Maybe I know that there was some erasure that happens during the Napoleonic age with him. I'm not really sure, but this book is an absolute treasure trove because the biographer himself actually went to the Museum of Alexandre Dumas, read through pretty much every single letter, visited the hotels that Alexandre Dumas visited just so that he could maybe see a scrap of a letter or a portrait or whatever that was left behind for his legacy.
Well, cool. So we'll get into the part 3 here of Alexandre Dumas, but as always, before we do, again, for anybody that's interested in supporting this show, you can do so by going to our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. Throw us a couple of bones if you're feeling so inclined. And we've also been getting a handful of more like reviews these days, which has been very sweet for everybody that's done so. So if you're able to and you like the show and you want to give us a nice review on somewhere like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, obviously we would very much appreciate that as well. So without further ado, my friend, take it away.
Yes. So in the last episode, we cover the early days of Thomas Alexandre Dumas' time in the military. Having joined at the very end of the Ancien Regime, Dumas spent his early days as a Queen's Dragoon, which was an elite force of expendable cavalry meant to be the first men in and the last men out. Here we see some inspiration from his son's book, The Three Musketeers, with the dragoons fighting and competing with one another, much like the swashbuckling Kingsguard. Alexander even fought 3 consecutive duels in one day, just like D'Artagnan. While he drank and fought with his brothers in arms, the revolution spread its wings on Bastille Day, and the Assembly was born, putting the people's needs over the desires of King Louis XVI. The dragoons became the National Guards, and they had their first missions to Villers-Cotterêts, where Alexander would live at Claude Labourè's hotel and fall in love with his daughter, Marie-Louise. Promising to marry her when he became a sergeant, Alex was sent out to control the rioters in Paris after the king attempted to flee to Austria. And the dragoons were able to save nearly 2,000 lives by refusing to fire on the protesters and calming them down. Afterwards, Alex was sent to Belgium, since the new assembly believed it was their duty to, quote, free the slaves of the kings by invading any nation that had a crown in power. While there, Alexander was doing a routine scout mission when he spotted a raiding party of 4 times the size of his own. Without thinking, he charged at them, saber in hand, and leapt across a massive gulch where he terrified the Austrians, and they had to lay down their weapons and surrender. Tales of defeating enemies without a shot fired were pretty rare, and as a result, Alex got promoted to sergeant. After going back to Villers-Cotterêts to have a child with his new wife, Marie-Louise, Alexander was called to an even higher purpose. Stories of the young Alexander's bravery had circulated Paris, and a bidding war started on who could keep him within their ranks. The highest bid, to Alex's surprise, would come from Joseph Boulogne, a.k.a. the Black Knight Chevalier du Saint-Georges. Promoted from sergeant to lieutenant general by his old fencing hero, Alex and Chevalier would spearhead an army of color known as the Free American Legion, or the Black Legion.
The Free American Legion?
So, yeah, they called it the Free American Legion of the South, which sounds very confusing. France had this habit of naming the legions off of the targeted areas that they were trying to go to. So later on, we'll talk about the Army of Italy. We're not talking about Italians. We're talking about the French army meant to go to Italy. So the Free American Legion of the South meant the Free American Legion of South America, which to them meant the island of Saint-Domingue, not like Georgia and Florida and all those other places, right? But we also call it Legion Noire or the Black Legion. So I'm going to use the Black Legion for the most part because that's also historically accurate. But the official government name is the Legion of Free Americans of the South or something like that, right? So while Alex shipped out to train his Legion Noire, the powdered wigs of France were deciding on what to do with their runaway king. Louis XVI, now called Louis Capet, referring to his ancestor who took the throne 800 years ago, was put on trial for treason. It's really interesting with putting a king on trial and no longer referring to him as a king because you have to use historical records to even figure out what his last name was, which I think is kind of interesting. Now, Louis tried to spin a story about how he was running away from the royalists who wanted to kill him, but he wasn't fooling anyone. And on January 21st, 1793, Capet was decapitated with a newfangled invention by a man named Dr. Guillotine. Didn't know that it was just like a guy named Dr. Guillotine. That's like, I'm Mr. Gun.
That's true.
In my head. Featuring a long, neck-wide razor that fell from a considerable height, the guillotine was the newest technology in humane killing, with Dr. Guillotine himself claiming it was absolutely painless. This isn't true, by the way. There are accounts of decapitated heads being conscious and able to react to stimuli, whether we're conscious or not, we don't really know, being able to react to stimuli like 15, 20, sometimes 30 seconds after decapitation, because, you know, your brain has all the thinky bits. Now, nonetheless, the guillotine would become quite popular, and it would spell the end for many Frenchmen to come, but we'll get on that later. For now, Alex has an army to build. When Alexander took up the offer to be lieutenant general for his dear ex-aristocrat fencing master, he might have regretted it. Despite Chevalier's genuine enthusiasm for an all-black legion, he was an upper-crust gentleman first and a soldier maybe third or fourth. Alex arrived to see an ununiformed, untrained, and under-equipped militia. And when he turned to ask Saint-Georges what happened, he found he was all alone. See, Chevalier was out in Paris on a so-called recruiting mission, which generally involved going to parties and playing violin for the ladies, which meant that Alexander was pretty much in charge of the entire Black Legion. Luckily, he was used to being dealt a bad hand. For most generals, it would have felt impossible to get these men into fighting shape, but Alex had been a dragoon, which meant that he knew how to train an army that was given terrible resources. The subpar horses that they were requisitioned were maintained to the best of his soldiers' abilities, and training was done regularly to ensure that the men were in fighting shape. Alex would plead, bargain, and beg for guns and equipment, and by sheer force of will, he was able to uniform and equip 200 cavalrymen and 800 foot soldiers of the Legion.
Nice.
Yeah. Each legion was about 1,000, maybe 3,000 soldiers, depending on the size. And then they would be subsets of a larger army, right? In February of 1793, the new government ordered the Legion to defend the Belgian frontier near Maud. He ran charges nearly every day with his men, being famous for not only their aggression, but also their unique ability to take prisoners at a time when that was no longer seen as an option. Dumas, the author, writes, quote, "As the head of the regiment, my father saw a vaster field open for his courage and intelligence. Once, for example, the American Legion was in the vanguard when it suddenly stumbled upon a Dutch regiment, hidden in the rye, which, at that season, grew as high as a man. The regiment's presence was given away by the movement of a sergeant who was barely 15 paces from my father, and raising his gun to fire. My father saw his movement, understood that at such a distance the sergeant could not miss, drew a pistol from his holster and pulled the trigger with such rapidity and luck that before the sergeant's weapon was leveled, its barrel was pierced clean through by my father's pistol bullet."
Wait, the
pistol
barrel of the gun was shot with the pistol?
Yeah, so quickly he grabs a musket from his holster, fires it, or pistol from his holster, fires it, and then shoots a bullet clean through the enemy officer's musket.
That's crazy.
Yeah. In fact, Dumas says, "My father picked up the bullet-pierced rifle from the battlefield, and it was held together by 2 scraps of iron. I had it for a long time in my possession, but in the end it was stolen during a move."
Oh, that's crazy.
This is actually like a real story, which is so wild.
Just a tall tale.
Such a kind of a Wild West thing, right? Like shooting right through a gun.
Totally. It makes me think of it's not quite the same, but it's like in Looney Tunes when Bugs Bunny puts his finger in Elmer Fudd's gun and it like curls back. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But the second the shot was fired, the Black Legion ran towards the Dutch. It was a total clean sweep of the Dutch forces, right? Or the Belgian forces. No, Dutch. Yeah. And victory was assured. The Black Legion's fight against the Dutch was a success, but their next battle wouldn't come from foreign lands, but within their own country. A general named Charles Dumouriez seems to be failing in his attacks on the northern front, and Maximilien Robespierre believed that Dumouriez might be a royalist conspirator. A group of commissioners were sent to the general's encampment, but Dumouriez sensed a trap and arrested the officials. After an hour of debating with them, the general refused to go on trial in Paris and instead tried his odds at defeating the new French government himself in the hopes of restoring the royal line. Dumouriez offered for both Chevalier de Saint-Georges and Alexandre Dumas to defect, but instead, the Black Legion rallied forces to defend the city of Lille from the coup d'etat. So basically, this guy was not doing a very good job as the leader of the Army of the North, which was sort of like in the Alps area. And Robespierre was like, what's the deal with that? We've been waiting on news for a really long time. Is this guy purposefully stalling? And it turns out he was. He was trying to put himself as a Belgian dictator. And when an investigating crew went out to go see him, he arrested them and then he basically mailed letters to every single general that he had ever worked with saying, hey, we're going to take over the French government. You should join me.
Crazy.
And Saint-Georges and Alexander were like, fuck you. Flipped around, went and fought him. I think Dumouriez got away, but the entire force was destroyed.
Interesting. That's crazy.
Yeah. Even after proving their mettle in Belgium and against conspirators, the Black Legion still had their own problems. Pay was slow or non-existent, and a new scandal began that would turn dear friends to enemies. The Ministry of War began to accuse the Free American Legion of a horse trading scheme, where the generals would sell well-trained government horses to buy cheaper, weaker ones and keep the difference. When the blame fell on Chevalier, according to Dumas the author, he tried to pin it on his second-in-command, Alex. The accusation enraged Alexander, and he swore to take revenge on the man who practically raised him, challenging him to a duel. Basically, Saint-Georges tried to throw Alexander under the bus, and he was so pissed off, he was willing to fight his mentor to the death.
Jeez.
The Chevalier was still deadly with a sword as he reached his 50s, but he knew how to pick his battles. Saint-Georges avoided his hot-headed lieutenant general for nearly a year until Alex was bedridden from a cold. Taking the opportunity, the old fencer visited his bedside, and before Alex could challenge him, Chevalier hugged him so tight he couldn't speak, crying about how much he missed his young protege. Dumas, the author, writes about the interaction, quote, "My father wanted to speak, but Saint-Georges did not give him the time. 'Ah,' he said, 'but you wanted to kill me? Me, Dumas, kill Saint-Georges? Are you not my own son? When Saint-Georges is dead, could there be any other man to replace him? Come on, get up. Order me a lamb chop and let there be no more question of this foolishness.' My father was strongly inclined to pursue the affair to the very end, but what is there to say to a man who sits on your bed, embraces you, calls you son, and demands some lunch? Ah, you old brigand. You are surely happy I'm your successor and not the Minister of War, or I'd have you hang." "Oh, you would guillotine me at least," said Saint-Georges, forcing a laugh. "Not at all, not at all. Honest people are guillotined these days. Only thieves are hanged."
Dang.
They traded... yeah.
Harsh.
They traded threats and insults for about an hour until the two heroes made peace over lunch.
It is really, really French to be like, oh, come on.
I'll kill
Let's
you.
end this. Give me a lamb chop. Let's have some lunch.
Literally. "I'll kill you. I love you. You're my own son." "Oh, you bastard. Let's have lamb chops." I just love that little, I don't know, it's a little window into their relationship where Chevalier is certainly for the cause, but he's never not going to be the hoity-toity rich fencer who used to play violin with Marie Antoinette. And then, Alexander is like this very headstrong, if you've ever read Way of Kings, he's sort of this like Dalinar character where he's very dogmatic about his militant views and all of this. And, the two love each other, but Alexander cannot stand like the foppishness of sort of Saint-Georges' personality. And, Saint-Georges is like, "Oh, shut up. Just let's have lunch. Whatever. Maybe I accused you of horse trading. Whatever. I was trying not to get killed. Okay?" Whether the Chevalier de Saint-Georges was guilty was never really decided, but as a result of the poor finances of the Free Legion, its ranks were dissolved among the army. The Legionnois was no more. Alex returned home to his wife for a few months, raising his first baby, which had just been born, named Alexandrine. After hearing that their Dream Legion was disbanded, Alex didn't know what to make of it. Would he be able to fight, or would he be shamed into retirement? Well, quite the contrary. Paris had sent him new orders. He was to be promoted to full general.
Damn.
Alexander had gone from a nameless soldier to the highest rank of the French military, with tens of thousands of troops under his direct command. And while that seems like a good thing, the position came with some drawbacks. If Alex didn't play his cards right, he could experience some severe weight loss, since at the time, a general's head had a habit of falling off their torsos. Oof. To give some context, the defection of General Dumouriez, along with the countless other resistors, had made the assembly so suspicious they would create a new bureau to investigate conspiracies. Innocently named the Committee of Public Safety, this elite group of assemblymen would usher in a time historians now called the Reign of Terror. Committee of Public Safety sounds very pleasant compared to what they end up doing. With only 9 members, the committee had given themselves the power of judge, jury, and executioner, while also ushering in a culture of unending persecution and violence. For this story, the 3 that we're going to pay the most attention to are Louis de Saint-Just, Lazare Carnot, and the radical despot Maximilien Robespierre. But I'll also say Robespierre, anglicize, either way. Frenchmen, fuck off. Think of these people as sort of the 3 Bond villains of the French Revolution. Louis de Saint-Just, the youngest of the group, was in his early 20s when he earned the moniker the Archangel of Terror. His main job was to keep rogue generals in line. If subordination was spotted in the ranks or a general dragged their feet on an order, Saint-Just was known to make a visit to the encampment and hang the offending officer in front of all of his men to remind them who was in power. The Archangel of Terror was a fervent Robespierre supporter, and what he lacked in cunning, he made up for in sheer brutality. Lazare Carnot was the oldest and most moderate of the Committee of Public Safety, but that wasn't saying much. While Louis de Saint-Just's plan for military glory was violent and short-sighted, Lazare Carnot had a clearer vision for French conquest. Known as, quote, the organizer of victory, he was an accomplished engineer who had decided that the era of the Free Legions was over. Carnot believed that France couldn't win by simply relying on roving bands of volunteers, so he organized something that had never been seen before. Carnot wished to exploit the vast surplus of able-bodied men in France, so he issued the first military draft in modern history.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Apparently that wasn't a thing before. I would have sworn that, like, kings just forced everybody to go to war, but I guess this is the first official draft in modern history.
Yeah. Well, it's like when the American Civil War, it was the first time ever in American history that a draft was enforced, and people were pissed.
Really?
They were like, "What? You're just going to force me to go and fight for you?" And they were basically like, "Yep, we need bodies. That's it." Like,
yeah.
So yeah,
it didn't go well in the French Revolution either. We'll get to that towards the end of the episode. But the west of France was not having it when it came to the draft, because they were mainly the farmers. So, like, if the dudes leave, everybody starves, right? And they're already starving as it is because of the previous famines. But in only 11 months, the French military had grown from 178,000 men to a standing army of 800,000 soldiers. Wow. The hope of providing muskets for each soldier was now just a dream, and the committee issued an edict that every blacksmith in France must drop their work to begin forging spears in order to equip the massive army. It had been nearly 100 years since the French had used polearms in battle, but now, as Carnot had written to the people, quote, the pike is the arm of liberty.
Wow.
So while the revolution might be better remembered by the guillotine, most Frenchmen had a greater nostalgia for the pike, seeing it as a reminder of medieval peasants overthrowing their oppressive knights or Greek hoplites going to war for their democratic city-states. It became a national symbol, and even criticizing its efficiency could get you on the committee's execution list. So this is where we're getting to, like, absolute blind patriotism, where they're like, okay, we have a standing army of 800,000, but we don't have uniforms. We don't have guns. You're making us go to war against cannons with spears. And they're like, oh, wow, you're criticizing us? Okay, we're going to execute you. That's where we're getting
Jeez,
to. Right?
that's gnarly. It's even gnarlier to think about. I mean, fighting with spears or pikes, really, because pikes are even more rudimentary than spears. Spears you can actually form in certain ways to have certain weights where you can chuck them really far and actually like impale people or whatever. Pikes are the most, in my mind, like barbarian-like weapons you can possibly have. It's basically, go get me a stick.
Besides a club, you know?
Barely, though, because it's one of those where it's like a club, because to an extent, a club you have to form in a certain way to where it has like a knob at the end of it or something.
Yeah.
Unless it's just you're grabbing a stick and smashing somebody with a stick.
Yeah. The pikes that you'd see in France at the time would have very spear-like heads, so they would be sharpened on the sides. Sure. But the main difference between a pike and a spear at this point in history, the pike that you're thinking of is probably close to the Roman pike, which is literally just a forged to a point spike at the end of a stick. This one is a lot closer to like what you'd see on a Viking spear, but the difference is that the pole arm is massively longer.
Gotcha.
Like think like 12 to 15 feet in length, right? But like I said, it became like this national symbol everywhere where like there was this sort of empowerment because, and I can kind of see where it's getting off. Like your local blacksmith is making the weapon that you're going to use to fight for liberty, right? But like I said, the draft was not very well loved. It was highly effective. You know, Carnot's whole like idea was he was a mathematician. His thing was if we can apply constant pressure with a constant amount of force, and I know that we have the largest amount of young able-bodied males in Europe, we're going to win on all fronts, right? And he's like, and then we'll just catch up with guns later. But for now, we're just going to equip people with spears and get them out there. But, you know, the last member of the committee that I think really makes a big stand in Alexander's story is Maximilien Robespierre, which we've talked about him before, but it can't be understated how crucial he was to the Committee of Public Safety and the culture that caused the Reign of Terror to exist. See, Robespierre was now the official leader of the Jacobin Club, which was sort of an anti-royal social club that had gone feral when he took control. The Jacobins had clubs in every corner of France, and Robespierre convinced them that Frenchmen with moderate opinions were going to cause the death of the nation. The Jacobins were instructed to root out anyone who wasn't fully invested in the cause, and literal build-your-own guillotine kits were sent out to the far reaches of the country, with instructions on how to detect and accuse traitors and moderates.
Jeez.
So basically, like, these carpenters would set up, like, a Lego set for guillotines so that they could officially send guillotines out to every country, and then you get, like, a little handbook of stuff that Robespierre says, being like, if these people don't seem 100% invested in France and its future as a republic, they should be executed, right? If they seem like they're kind of like, I miss the old days, or maybe they still are holding on to their own religious beliefs, like, well, you know, the church was the wife of the king, and therefore these people still believe in the king, and therefore they should be executed, right? If you are not... For instance, now they've completely gotten rid of the Gregorian calendar and they're using their own unit of 10 calendar. If you heard that somebody might be still using the Gregorian calendar in their bookings or something like that, that could be enough to accuse you and get you executed.
Jeez, that's wild.
Right? You know, the estimates range drastically, but it's predicted that around 40,000 people would be put to death just by the guillotine alone. And it's mainly Robespierre's Jacobin clubs being responsible for most of the killings. It's a full witch hunt, right?
It's wild.
Needless to say, Alexander needed to keep his head on a swivel for the year that these three were in power. 7 days a week, he was required to correspond with the committee about every single decision he made. And for a few months, Alexander hopped from position to position, working as a general in 3 or 4 different armies. While many other officers were scared or irritated by the committee, Alex remained headstrong. For white officers, this new committee threatened their way of life. But for Alex, the revolution was his only lifeline. Because of his race, if he was anywhere else in the Western world, Alex would be persecuted or put in chains. So he had to deal with these bloodthirsty bureaucrats. And it was really just the only path to salvation for him. It was during his time hopping between armies that Alex would first make enemies with the Jacobins, however, when he was stationed near Spain. He rode into the fortified city of Bayonne, and when he arrived at his rooms overlooking the town square, The rioters gathered for the nightly executions at the guillotine, which was now the most popular means of entertainment. Unlike his fellow citizens, Dumas couldn't stand the witch hunt, and he refused to go out and see men and women killed without due process. Dumas, the author, writes, quote, "When the terrible hour arrived, all other windows were filled with spectators, but my father would close his, pull down the blinds, and draw his curtains. Then, beneath his closed windows, a terrible commotion would begin, and the sans-culottes of the countryside would gather around and yell at him, saying, 'Monsieur de l'Humanite, come to your windows and show yourself.' Despite these catcalls, which often took on a character so threatening that my father and his aides-de-camp stood, sabers at the ready, not one of the windows was open, nor did one of the officers belonging to my father's staff appear at the balcony. As a result, the new general ceased to be addressed as Citizen Alexandre Dumas, and he was then known by the name of Monsieur Humanity." Now, it might not seem like an insult to be considered Mr. Humanity, but remember, at the time, the Jacobins wanted to root out any moderates that weren't all in on Robespierre's plan, and being referred to as Monsieur was accusing him of being an aristocrat still.
Oh, interesting. I thought it was a positive initially.
Yeah. No, they're like, "Oh, Mr. Humanity, come out here," because basically they're saying, you're a moderate, you're not all in, you don't want to see the blood, you don't want to see this, but this is what needs to be done for France. And Alexander was like, "Man, I don't want to get killed, but I am not participating in that bullshit."
Sure.
Right?
It's crazy.
Now, luckily, yeah, it is really crazy. We're getting to this point where, and Alexandre Dumas writes some stories that I didn't include because they were kind of suspect. Like one of them was, his father rides into town and he sees a guillotine and it's snowing. And he thinks, wow, we're going to be cold for the night. Why don't you go ahead and chop up that guillotine and use it for firewood? And it's a cool message, right? That he didn't participate in the killings of the Jacobin Club, but also Alexander wasn't an idiot and he would have immediately been killed if he tried to do that, right? So needless to say, Alexander didn't want this to happen, but he really didn't have any other choice. The Committee of Public Safety was in charge of everything at this point. Now, luckily, Alexander wouldn't stay in Spain for long, since he would be given his most important commission yet. Thanks to the Committee of Public Safety, the last 4 leaders of his new position had been killed or demoted, and it was Alex's turn to prove his worth to the cause. He would now be taking the place of Commander-in-Chief of the Army of the North, with a new goal to conquer the lofty peaks of the Swiss Alps. Yeah. You might be wondering what the French army was doing 7,300 feet above sea level in January. Well, besides the new objective of freeing the world from tyranny, the Austrians and Italians from the Kingdom of Sardinia were choking a major trade route into France, impoverishing the people even further. If you don't know, Italy is not one consolidated country yet. So you got like Milan, Sardinia, all those places, and they're generally under Austrian rule at the time.
Gotcha.
According to Garnon, the engineering mastermind behind the committee, the objective was simple. Open up the territory by taking the key objectives of Mont-Cenis and St. Bernard Pass. On the ground, however, Alexander saw a different story. Apparently, killing an army's general and hanging him by the ankles doesn't do great things for the soldiers. The Army of the Alps was a lot like a Waffle House, with angry, tobacco-addicted managers coming in and out every week, locals fighting the cooks, and cooks fighting the cooks. The force was split up across all the Alps, with entire mountains blocking communication from one battalion to another, and angry locals jumped at the chance of raiding a supply cart or taking out a courier, sending messages. Most importantly, the army was completely immobilized by the weather. By January, the snow was piling up in huge banks, but the frosts weren't cold enough to harden them into ice. So instead of men and horses being able to walk over the snow, they were falling straight into it. Kind of like the Fellowship of the Ring climbing the Red Horn Mountains, if you remember. The winter winds, affectionately named the Tortures by the locals, would blow the snow into drifts so big it made the roads invisible and impassable. Jeez. And unlike the, it's like complete shutdown, right? And like, unlike the Austrians and the Sardinians who lived there, trained there, were used to it, the French were suffering in the biting weather. When Alexander arrived, he wrote to the committee, telling them that the army was stuck until the snow either froze over solid or melted away. But they wouldn't hear it. Carnot accused Alexander of wanting to sit back and relax until spring, threatening him in the complimentary way only a politician can. Threats be damned, he was a Republican at heart, and he wouldn't tell his soldiers to risk their lives if he wasn't prepared to do the same. Despite knowing that dozens of generals have been imprisoned and executed for less, he refused to attack until he knew the army could mobilize. Knowing he wouldn't move on the matter, the committee went after his character. They accused Alexander of being a royal sympathizer, citing his time quelling the riots near King Louis's escape during his time as an ex-dragoon. Alexander remained steadfast, flipping the argument on its head. So, basically, the army can't move. Alex is stuck between a rock and a hard place because he knows that the committee wants to take the, Mont-Cenis and Petit Saint-Bernard, the pass there, by January, during January, in the middle of winter. They're like, I know it's snowy, but don't be a baby about it. Go fight anyway. And Alex is like, we can't move. If we try to attack, our men are going to fall off of mountains. They're going to die. We're going to starve and freeze to death. So he's kind of in this position where he's like, I know that the last general who was here got basically killed for less than what I'm doing now, but I have to be steadfast and I have to make sure that these men don't get sent out into the winter. Otherwise, they're going to die.
Wow.
So he sends a letter to Carnot and sort of paraphrasing it. He says, quote, without entering too many details, I will submit to you some striking observations. 3 of us dragoons were at the riots. Despite our duty, we were unwavering in our principles and happy to have an impact on the great revolutionary movements. Lazowski, Bazdelone, and I. The first was poisoned to death. The second, a brigadier general in the Army of the Alps, was just assassinated in Chambéry. As for me, I am being slandered, and I am expecting poisoning or assassination, but whatever fate awaits me, I will serve the Republic, nonetheless, right to the last moment. Balls of steel.
Crazy. I also
Like
I didn't realize that Mike Wazowski was a good friend of Alexander's.
Lazowski? It was me, Mike Wazowski.
Mike Wazowski. It's a little Monsters Inc. reference for those that don't catch that one.
Now I'm just imagining Mike Wazowski shooting down rioters during the Bastille Day.
Well, you can kind of imagine him in the winter at least, because remember they get banished to the
Exactly.
Himalayas, and he meets the abominable snowman or whatever, the Yeti. Anyway.
Yeah.
Stupid joke. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Whatever. It's fine. Whatever. It's a podcast. If you want to learn all the history, just read the book.
That's
okay.
true.
But if you want to listen to us make dumb jokes, this is where you listen.
And have a good
to us,
time, right? Hopefully.
But it is he's kind of pointing out this thing. He's like, I'm noticing a pattern here. Me and the other guys that I served with didn't attack the rioters, right? We mentioned at the top of the episode, he saved 2,000 people during that time where King Louis escaped and the rioters are getting out of hand. If you remember, what's his name? The French hero of the American Revolution.
Oh my God, how's it escaping me? Lafayette.
Yeah, Lafayette was there, right? And he shot at the crowd. He ran away. But Alexander and his troops did not kill anybody. But nonetheless, he's like, I think it's funny that you're sending me these accusatory threats because I remember my 2 buddies that were there with me. One of them just got poisoned and the other one was just assassinated, and he was in this same army. So I know you're going to kill me, but I'm still going to serve the Republic until the very end. He's like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and you're going to have to kill me if you want to send these troops out in the middle of winter.
Wow.
Yeah. So despite Alexander's refusal to move his troops, Carnot decided not to kill him. Maybe he was touched by Alex's Republican heart, or he was running out of replacements. But either way, the soldiers didn't make their first attack until April 5th, 1794. The army managed to take the smaller of the 2 objectives, the St. Bernard Pass, but the attack on Mont-Cenis was so terrible, Alex was almost accused of treason. Alex was back at camp when one of his subordinates, Lieutenant General Sarre, led the attack on Mont-Cenis, beginning their hike at 9:30 at night. As they ascended the mountains, conditions looked worse and worse. The men were under-equipped for the ice, and while fumbling in the dark, soldiers began to fall to their icy death, slipping off the side of the mountain.
Ugh.
Yeah. It's April. He thought that it had melted enough, but it didn't. And when dawn broke, Lieutenant General Sarre looked up at the outposts they were trying to attack, and he saw the worst news possible. The fortification on Malcenis was guarded by 2,500 reinforcements with their cannons aimed straight at his battalion. They'd been set up, and the locals ratted out their position. It was a trap. Without giving his soldiers time to rest after marching through the night, Sarre charged right at them. The Austro-Sardinian artillery made short work of them. The French could hardly climb the icy peak, and their bright blue uniforms made perfect targets against the snow. News of this crushing defeat hit Alexander hard. This would be the first battle he had fought and lost completely. On top of his own grief, the Committee of Public Safety was beginning to breathe down his neck again. He needed to take Malcenis, and in order to do so, he'd have to go there himself. The battle began for Alex before he even reached the target. In order to win, he needed all the cards stacked in his favor. Alex began by prioritizing French relations with the locals. He couldn't expect to win if commoners were willing to tip off his location, like last time. He used what little political sway he had to calm down the local Jacobin clubs and began joining the Mont Blanc men on hunting trips, where he learned about the iron spikes and snowshoes that the hunters wore in the backcountry. He'd make a mold of them and have them sent back to France, requisitioning 4,000 of them for his men. He also learned that the mountain men wore white coats, which hid them from their prey. In the towns, Alexander would plant spies, working as dairy merchants to get a better understanding of not only troop movements, but also public opinion about the French. His soldiers were instructed to be cordial and respectful to the people of the land. Maps were impossible to find for the region, but luckily, the first assault gave him a better idea of Malcenis' layout. It was fortified on 3 sides, with one side overlooking a massive drop, which meant that he only had 3 angles of approach to work with. With Alexander leading the charge, the Army of the North reared their pikes and muskets towards the fortification. The Sardinians were equipped with muskets that fired lead balls nearly an inch around, along with cannons equipped with munitions meant to bounce low on the ground, plowing their way through the bodies of their enemies around chest height. Imagine shooting a bowling ball through a crowd of people, right? Luckily, however, Alex ordered his men to don the white hunting jackets, and on their feet, they wore wool socks with crampons or snowshoes. Through a series of systematic diversions on all 3 sides of the fort, the French were able to charge the fort and overrun it. By the end of the battle, Alex earned the title of Mr. Humanity, this time as a badge of pride, not ridicule. While the French certainly dispatched countless men, they had also secured around 1,000 enemy troops as living prisoners, along with the fort filled with ammunition, weapons, and cannons which would be distributed to his new men. General Dumas wrote to all of his correspondents about the victory, reporting only 7 or 8 dead and only 30 out of 3,000 wounded. He made sure to improve relations with the locals who had been suffering from their presence. Quote, "The French soldier conducted himself with intrepidity and heroism. He honored misfortune and shared his bread with the inhabitant that was ruined by the scourge of war." Dumas would be famous for more than his skill with the sword or his incredible strength. After the Battle of Malcenis, soldiers wrote home to their wives about the man who assured victory on every battlefield with his brilliant mind. Following the Battle of Malcenis, Paris had reached critical mass. The bloodiness of the revolution had reached an apex, with Maximilien Robespierre at the top as the head of the Committee of Public Safety. The number of executions by the committee and their Jacobin fanboys had reached the tens of thousands, and government workers began to stay in their homes, fearing that they might be summoned to stand before Robespierre or Saint-Just, the Archangel of Terror. Things would change, however, when the assembly decided that the people who needed to be taken to the nation's razor were the executioners operating it. On July 27th, 1794, Maximilien Robespierre, along with Louis de Saint-Just, would be executed for abusing their power outside of the confines of the law. The committee would continue to exist, but only with the power to investigate, not to kill without trial.
Dang.
France had come to a turning point. The reign of terror was over, but the country was still devastated. Paris might be taking a break from rioting, but the western coast, called the Vendée, was brutally wounded by civil war. Many of the men of the West abhorred the revolution, either for religious reasons or because they resisted the draft, like we were talking about before. And while Alex was fighting in the Alps, the Army of the West had been fighting their own countrymen who refused the draft. Between the Black Legion of Free Americans and the disarray of the Army of the North, Alex had gained a reputation for his ability to whip a fighting force into shape. It was well known how much of a Republican he was, but he also wasn't a Jacobin lunatic, which meant that he wouldn't tolerate insubordination, but he also refused to join in on baseless violence. He was the perfect man to fix the Army of the West. So when Alex arrived in September of 1794, he was appalled at the state of the Western coast. The anti-draft force was destroyed, but years spent where soldiers fought their own countrymen had corrupted them, and they had become no more than a band of raiders. Quote, "The Vendeans are no longer in need of pretexts of religion or royalist sentiments to take up arms. They were being forced to defend their homes. Their women were being raped. Their children were being put to the sword." The Army of the West would sweep across the Vendee in what they called hell columns, where grids of 1,000 or more soldiers would systematically shoot, kill, or burn anything in their sight. We're sort of getting to like scorched land tactics.
Yeah, I was going to say, this also very much reminds me of tactics that ended up being used in the American Civil War 50 some odd 60 years from this point. So it's really interesting that it's getting to this point of like just
like full Andrew Jackson, like completely, let's just obliterate everything sort of behavior.
And right? I've been holding off on this for 5 or 10 minutes now, but when you're telling the story of them trying to climb up the mountain and they find that they've been betrayed, all I could think of was Admiral Akbar going, "It's a trap! It's a trap!"
Yeah, literally. I mean, that's what happened the first time. It's also, like I said, the Army of the North had gone through like 4 or 5 different generals, so it was a total shit show when Alex first got there. And, you know, April isn't exactly the middle of spring when you're on the mountainside, so it was still pretty early to attack, but he knew that he had to do something, otherwise he was going to get his head cut off.
It's wild.
So, but it was really cool to like watch him prepare for the second attack, you know, wearing the hunter's camouflage of the locals, the white jackets, and taking molds of the iron crampons that the hunters would wear, or snowshoes. But yeah, it's kind of cool.
Basically, he did his homework, which is pretty sweet.
He did his homework. And now, he's got this reputation for being able to fix an army. And now he's going to the Army of the West, which is honestly in the worst condition out of all the other armies. So,
and I will also say, all of this that you're telling me is like flooding back all this crazy memories that I have from learning the French Revolution in high school. Again, I've done shout outs to my boy, Mr. Regan, many times in the past. He was like my teacher. Everybody in my school, it was like Mr. Regan was, their favorite teacher. He was the guy. And it was because he was such a truly great teacher. He wasn't the funnest teacher. He was just the best teacher. You genuinely you were waiting for every word of how he would tell you these stories of history or whatever. Yeah. And it was probably the first time that I can remember going, oh, wow, history is absolutely fascinating. And it was the French Revolution. So it's really interesting you being like, oh, the Jacobins and all this kind of stuff. And if I'm not mistaken, the opposing political force was I want to say it's pronounced the Girondis or Girondis.
Girondins.
There we go.
Yeah.
And I remember that very specifically too.
Were the opposing force.
Yeah, and that was like a big part of it. And the Reign of Terror, like that was the second phase of the French Revolution. Then we're going to get into the third phase, which is with Napoleon. And the first phase was with the king and them revolting and Bastille and all that kind of stuff. So this has been a crazy flood of these memories.
Yeah, it's been a huge refresher for me too, because we've talked about this before, and I think the listeners have heard. I am not an Enlightenment era guy when it comes to history. The Enlightenment era, the tricorn hat.
You're turning into one though. I can feel it.
I am turning into one though. Like the French Revolution is a great entry point for me because there's just so much interesting. Like we'll talk about it later, but just like you just deleted the church from your country. Yeah. Like that makes no sense. How could that is earth shattering.
That's cool,
right? And we're in a society now where a black dude came to France, immediately became a count, then the revolution happened, and he went from private to commander-in-chief in 365 days. Yeah. Like, the amount of traction and speed and progression that's happening in the French Revolution is breakneck, right? And obviously there's tons of consequences that come with it, right? With people like Robespierre and the Jacobins and all of those dudes. But it is incredible, right? Like, we're going to get to a point soon, at kind of the beginning of the next episode, where we talk about the fact that they go and abolish slavery. Like, cool. in Saint-Domingue. It's so incredible to see this melting pot, right?
Yeah. French Revolution is fascinating. It was one of those subjects that I remember when we even approached it in high school. Boo, the French Revolution.
Same. I thought it was very stuffy.
And then by the end of it, I was like, this is rockin', dude. It's so sweet.
Yeah. It's wild. It's basically just like, okay, all of your radical ideas, let's just do them now. Do them now. You got 1 year. Just spit it all out. And this is the result, right?
Yeah, it was crazy.
But Alexandre Dumas is now the fixer, right? That's his job, at least for this next couple of years, to fix other broken military groups. Remember, the draft happened, right? So now the amount of like career military men is like 1 to 8, right? Yep. So finding a good general was hard to do. So he sort of got in high demand, and his next job was to pretty much fix the worst of the worst. Wow. The Army of the West had completely annihilated the Vendée, and like I said, they would do these hell columns where they would just mass extinct all of the western region of France. Wow. In fact, mass executions had gotten out of hand, and some battalions chose to save on gunpowder by tying up royalist Frenchmen and tossing them into the ocean 100 to 150 at a time. Whoa. Right? So they just they'd buy. In fact, there was even carpenters who built these like flotillas, right? These like big platforms that would go out into the ocean, and they'd have like a huge trap door, and then you'd have 150 French protesters, people, whoever they really wanted to kill. You tie them up, and then you just drop the trap door, and all of them would just drown simultaneously because they're like, bullets were too expensive. This is the psychotic, like psychopathy of the Western Army at the time.
That's gnarly.
Yeah. To see Alex's countrymen become completely feral made him sick to his stomach. And he decided to reorganize the entire army, making it illegal for them to interact with locals at all without reason. Quote, "The chief of staff will establish a police force as strict as it is fair. He will assure that no soldier, no matter its rank, will be in town without being attached there or having a mission that requires him. It will be the same for all agents employed in the army, and no one will leave his camp or quarters without any reason and without a formal order." Alex jailed war criminals, broke up munitions trading schemes, and punished assaulters and thieves. But it just wasn't enough. Any good man in the Army of the West would either die a victim or become as terrible as his companions. His last order before leaving was to scramble the army completely, swapping soldiers from the West with disciplined northern troops and vice versa. Basically, like a teacher, when you have like two people giggling in the back of the class, he's breaking them up and separating all of these different battalions so they can no longer do organized crime throughout the Vendée. Wow. And he kept an especially close eye on the officers, forcing them to live like their men. Quote, "The officers must provide an example to the soldier, and they should sleep, like them, in a tent." As a result, Alexander gained respect not only from the few good men left in the West, but also from the other side. Royalists would regard Alexander as one of the only respectable officers in the Republic, and he would be considered a voice of reason in France, even in other royal governments. So his name was starting to spread of like the good Republican, right? And Republican in the sense of the Republic of France, right? This is like one of the first times he gets written in, the author of the Black Count actually mentions this is one of the first times that he gets written in a foreign history book as like this very one respectable speck in the entire bullshit that was the Western Army. Wow. And while Alexander couldn't fix what the Army of the West had done to the Vendée, he left knowing that he at least made a difference. And the following year, as revolutions go, was relatively peaceful. Alexander went home to Villers-Cotterêts, where he bounced a 1-year-old Marie Alexandrine on his lap. During that time, the two were expecting for another daughter, which they would name Louise Alexandrine. He bought a farm in the town with about 30 acres and spent time with the woman he'd been missing since he had first met her as a private only a year ago. 1795 saw a momentary blip of calm, with only a few major concerns. The first of which was hyperinflation. In order to staunch the bleeding economy, the French government made a new currency backed by the gems and riches they recover from the Catholic Church called assignats or assignats. But during the Reign of Terror, this currency was printed so much that it fell through the floor of the printing house, and they were more valued for wiping your nose than buying bread at this point. Talk about the dollar collapsing. Dun-dun-dun. Fell through the floor. Okay.
It's like, I can't remember what it is, but there is a country in Africa, I want to say maybe it's Zimbabwe, where I can't remember how many years ago, maybe 20, 30 years ago, the leader of the country, maybe a dictator, I don't know enough about the history of it, printed so much money that it inflated to the point where now they have bills that are like $2 billion. And it's worth...
Venezuela had the same thing.
Yeah, like 50 cents.
I remember like my family's from Venezuela, and I remember we were talking about it, and it's just like, it'd be like a month's salary for the equivalent of like a McDonald's burger, and the most recent, you can't really call him president, would fly in entire planes filled with printed money, and they became like, literally it was like almost cheaper to use the bills as toilet paper as it is to actually, buy toilet paper with it.
That's crazy.
Like that's where we're getting at this point. It was kind of an interesting thing where I didn't realize that they had kept the wealth of the church and that the church never requisitioned their own stuff. They didn't kick them out. They just took all of the church wealth. It's kind of like what we talked about in the first episode when the guy realized that the treasury was empty and the treasury is a real room and he walks in and there's just crickets. The same thing is happening with inflation, where it's like inflation is happening and it's not like a stock number or like this like amorphous thing. You're literally in a room with a bunch of dollar bills and they're like, there's so many of them, it's worth nothing. Like, it's crazy. I just think it's so funny how like physical it is. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So one problem became another, and the hyperinflation led to riots in the streets again. And this time it was actually a fight for the return of kings. After around 5 years of democracy and still no food, about 30,000 royalists attacked the assembly, but they were defeated in one fell swoop. As the hungry peasants attempted to breach the assembly, they were met with shrapnel-loaded cannons, which shred them to pieces. Grape shot bounced through the chests of the crowd, and when the dust settled, there was no royalist revolt to speak of.
Jeez.
As a reward for his valor in putting down the rebellion, an artillery officer, a Corsican man with an apathetic glare, would be awarded the position of general-in-chief of the French army invading Italy. The attack on Italy seemed like a hopeless scheme, so while some might have been offended at the offer, this officer saw it as an opportunity. The Corsican artilleryman was, of course, Napoleon Bonaparte. And Alexandre Dumas would be called to aid him in his pursuit of glory, which is where we will pick up in the next episode of Alexandre Dumas.
And there it is. There's the I was waiting for the cliffhanger, and I was like, I feel like it's gonna be here soon with Napoleon. Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. I just wanted to open it up with sort of like a little myopic view of his sort of personality, because if you remember, we just talked about the first revolt, and Alexandre Dumas was like trying to calm them down, trying not to kill anybody, versus this revolt of the royalists. Basically the same thing is happening, but in reverse. And Napoleon, the artilleryman, is just being like, fill the cannons with shrapnel, kill all of them. Yep. Right? And he gets awarded with basically the same thing. Now, instead of being the general-in-chief of the Alps like Alexandre Dumas, Napoleon Bonaparte becomes the commander-in-chief of the army of Italy.
That's crazy cool.
And Alexandre Dumas ends up being his right-hand man during this scheme.
For any longtime listener of the show here, you're going to know that Napoleon is one of my, I hate to say favorite figures of history, because it's not like favorite as he was just the best. He's just utterly fascinating for me. I've been interested in Napoleon since high school, since literally we just talked about earlier in the episode, from going through the French Revolution to Mr. Regan's class, right? Mm-hmm. And eventually I am going to do a series on Napoleon, but it can't be for a while. And I've been saying that for literally 2 years now, being like, I'll do it one day, but I feel like I've got to get really far ahead in different subjects and all that kind of stuff. He would also be a very long one, because Napoleon's whole life and everything he did was just crazy cool. And unfortunately, the Ridley Scott movie that was made 2 years ago,
I've heard it was pretty bad.
I mean, yes, it was pretty bad.
It's also like, from what I understand, and I'm pulling this out of my ass here, but I'm pretty sure I've heard that Napoleon is considered statistically one of the most written about human beings on the planet.
Yeah.
Like, there was more stuff printed and talked about with him specifically than almost any other human being in history.
Yeah. I don't know if that's true. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Totally. Yeah. I don't know anything about Napoleon. Well, at least I didn't until I started reading this. So I'm sure you're going to have some notes and additions and maybe even some corrections as I get through this, but I will try to do him some justice until you get to do your own biography. Napoleon kind of sits in the same realm as like Teddy Roosevelt, I feel like, for us, where they're like, it's such a big character that you really have to like sit down, think about it, really take your time, read all of the stuff. Yeah. So I totally understand. You're like, this character is huge. Like it is big, and it's going to take some research.
Right. Well, and that's kind of what's happening right now with my next person that I'm working on, who you know about. But
you were about to accidentally drop it.
I'm just saying with my next subject that I'm working on, and you know who it is, Akiva, but the audience does yet. And it is going to be. I'll forewarn everybody now. It'll be a long series. It'll probably be, I would say, I'm guessing 8 parts is going to be my guess on it. But it is because it's one of those people that deserves it, in my opinion. It's there's so much good information, and understanding their life is, I think, important and interesting and fascinating. And if I can do a little slight, maybe you can figure out who it is. I would say especially for Americans. It is one of those people that when you learn about them, it'll illuminate a lot of things. But anyhow, we don't have to talk about that right now. We're still talking about Dumas.
You can make your predictions in the comments if anybody's listening on Spotify, or I believe there's a comment section on Apple Podcasts as well.
Yeah.
But leave some predictions in the comments of who you think the next biography is going to be.
Based off of my teasers.
I was going to talk about this at the top of the episode when we were talking about leaving reviews and stuff like that. Leave reviews. We want you to do that, first and foremost, but I would love to turn the comment sections into a dialogue where we can ask questions, we can come up with answers, we can, have some listener dialogue between one another and just like see what people are thinking about the episode. So
totally.
If you have any takeaways from this episode or any of the episodes in the past, we'd love to see your comments.
Absolutely. And I will be the first to warn that if you're a jerk in the comments, you're either going to be completely ignored or just straight up deleted, because I just ain't nobody got time for that. You know what I mean? So, again, if you just come over there to be a troll and a jerk or whatever, that's your prerogative. You can do that if you really feel it's necessary.
You can do that. It's engagement. We'll take it.
But
if you don't like us, you can tell us.
Right.
That's all right.
Get ready to be completely either ignored or just deleted after the fact, because I'm just like, this is just boo kind of a thing.
But we would love to hear from the community of anybody who's listening, what you think of this episode, where you think we've missed out. Also, questions. You can always email us at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com, or now that we have the comment section, you can also drop those questions in the comments.
100%. Yeah, with that too, you can also find us on social media, obviously places like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. I'd say at this point, YouTube is probably our most kind of easily accessible place where we're continuously posting things. I think you and I both struggle with social media in general because we're just not social media people, even though we know that we need to, and there's good promotional efforts.
Hell, we barely talk when we're not in person.
I know.
Unless we're like recording. Like, we don't text one another. It's just like we have to go out and hang out and have a beer in order to make conversation. So what makes you think that I'm going to be good on TikTok? I don't know.
I mean, we text occasionally, you and I do, but it's not like rapid fire.
But we're very in-person people.
We are. Like. Yeah. Whatever you want to call it, generational or personality wise, I don't really know, but I've just never really been super into it, even though I know it's good for, business and promotions and all that good stuff. So yep, you can find us in those places. And then again, like we said at the very beginning of the episode, if you want to support the show, you can do so by going to our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. Throw us a couple bones if you're feeling generous. Always like to give a shout out, Akiva, to your business, your actual full-time business, metalworkbymiola.com. Any updates there?
Still in the market for a new vehicle. So I think I'm just going to do this until the last batch is fully sold out. If you use code VAN at checkout, you'll get 25% off any of your orders. I know we've already had one listener buy one of my knives, a Petty Chef, about 2 weeks ago, and 25% off is a pretty substantial amount. So feel free to even just to browse and look at what we've got on the website. I've got some nice Damascus stuff, some basic carbon steel stuff, and if you're learning or hoping to take a class, feel free to reach out to Hardy and Fuller in Denver, where I teach. You can meet me in person. We can talk about knives. We can talk about biographers. We typically all have lunch together by the end of the end of the thing, so you can go and pick my brain about any of the biographies that we've done so far.
Yeah, super cool. All right, well, I guess we'll wrap it up there. Looking forward to part 4. What are you thinking, by the way? Part 4 is going to be the end, or part 5 is going to be the end, or even part 6? I'm not sure what your timeline's looking like so far.
We are certainly not getting past 5.
Okay.
Mainly because of Alexandre Dumas' lifespan.
That's fair.
He's a general, and we just name dropped Napoleon. And so things are going to go a little dicey for him.
Like Pancho Villa.
I am really
same thing.
excited. Yeah. Yeah. So I think we're going to hit 4. I think we might have a long 4. I don't think we'll have 5, but we'll see.
Okay.
I'm going to see if I can condense it and make it nice and neat.
Sweet. Sounds good. Well, all right. I guess we'll see kind of how the timeline goes, but we'll see everybody next in 2 weeks from now, I guess I should say, is our normal release schedule now. So I hope everybody's been enjoying the series. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and do remember, like always, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge, and I do hope you all learned something today.
See ya.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.